should see, what, day 16 or 17 above 100 degrees. St. Louis should go to 100 as well. And if we look at our analysis, the reason for it all is the jet stream far north across the country, cool air to the north, warm air to the south, and as you can see, there's a little dip here through the north center.
This is CNN.
Remembering Alan Shepard. He led us into space in the 1960s, landed on the moon in the 1970s, and inspired generations of Americans along the way. Also, looking back at the life of Robert Young, who entertained generations as the dad who knew best in the 60s and the most famous MD of the 1970s. CNN Today continues. I'm Lou Waters. Natalie Allen is off. Extensive coverage on the deaths of Alan Shepard and Robert Young ahead. But we begin with a groundbreaking development in the science of cloning. Researchers of mice. CNN medical correspondent Dr. Steve Salvatore explains how this feat could
cloned from adult cells, or indeed perhaps any cells. And in fact, I think it may be true to say that it's the first report of cloning clones of any vertebrate species.
It was developed at the University of Hawaii at Honolulu by Dr. Teruhiko Wakayama. To date, 5 generations have been cloned and more than 50 identical cloned mice have been produced. In the microinjection technique, a donor egg is taken from one mouse with the nucleus or genetic material removed. Scientists then take the nucleus from another mouse and inject it into the empty egg. After that egg divides, it's implanted into a surrogate mouse mom, who then gives birth to mice with the exact genetic material as the first mouse. Those cloned mice share the same exact DNA as the original donor mouse. Scientists are calling it an advance in cloning from the previous fusion method used to produce the first cloned sheep. Researchers believe this could help them better understand and perhaps better treat diseases like cancer, AIDS, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and aging. And they say this should make cloning animals much easier, not only for research, but for many practical uses, from livestock breeding to medicine.
Animals who have been carefully generated so that their organs can be used in human transplant surgery, which might sound to you somewhat shocking, but of course anyone who is in need of, for example, a new kidney, who is waiting, undergoing constant or repeated dialysis for a matching donor to be found, would, I think, be very, very eager that anything that can be done to help them should be facilitated.
Researchers are aware of the controversy surrounding cloning efforts. They emphasize that this discovery is not about cloning humans, but rather to advance our understanding of diseases, all in an effort to come up with better, more effective treatments. Dr. Steve Salvatore, CNN, New York.
Like many affluent communities, the Dallas suburb of Plano, Texas, America's charged to the stars, to one of Hollywood's leading stars. Look back at the great careers of Alan Shepard and Robert Young. Also ahead, record-setting heat creeps across the USA.
CNN.
The capsule that propelled Alan Shepard as the first American into space went back on display today at the National Air and Space Museum. This is the first time the capsule has been on display since 1995. The display is part of a tribute to Shepard, who died last night at the age of 74. Admiral Shepard was not only the first American who flew into space, but also went to the moon aboard Apollo 14. Alan Shepard was one of America's original astronauts and a shining star of the space program. John Holloman looks at Shepard's career and how he inspired those in and out of the space program.
NASA's official biography of Alan Shepard begins by saying he's a retired rear admiral and a former astronaut. Talk about understatement. What the document fails to say is that Shepard was a role model for an entire generation of young Americans. As the first American to travel in space, Alan Shepard inspired people like Norm Thagard, the first American to live on the Mir space station, to join the astronaut corps.
The fact that he flew the first flight tells you that
he must have been right at the top of his group. So he was at the top of a group that was already at the top of America's test pilots, I would guess, at the time. So the first flight certainly gave him the recognition, and then once he had the recognition, you realize that this was a pretty super guy.
And astronauts were not the only ones inspired.
Alan Shepard understood the odds. He faced them bravely. And he led our country and all humanity beyond the bounds of our planet, across a truly new frontier, into the new era of space exploration.
No one was more dedicated to this country and to the astronaut program, to flying, to the Navy, to being a dedicated patriot in this country. No one is going to exceed Al Shepard in that regard.
Jim Lovell, the commander of Apollo 13, wanted to be a Mercury astronaut and told the story of his meeting with Shepard early in the Mercury astronaut selection process.
I first met him when we were in the Mercury selection program together, and he gave me a ride over to the place where we were having our first interviews. And of course, I didn't make it, and Al did. But at that time, you know, he was really sort of a warm fellow, but he could be very aloof at times. We called him either the icy commander or Smiling Al at the Cape.
Shepard's friends and colleagues remember him first as a hero. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor, but also as a fierce competitor, something Shepard talked about in his final television interview with CNN 3 weeks ago.
I think being an astronaut, to me, and I think to most of the chaps, was a continual challenge. Because originally there was a challenge of the selection process, and then as chaps had been training for a couple of years, there'd be another selection process to move into this and that. It was always something, because there were a bunch of bright people.
Shepard was 74 years old when he succumbed to his final challenge, a losing battle with leukemia. John Holloman, CNN.
And now a look back at the life and career of Robert Young, who died peacefully yesterday in his Los Angeles home at the age of 91. To many, he was the TV dad with all the right answers, or he was the kindly doctor with just the right moral medicine. But much of Young's long career was captured on the silver screen. Here's CNN's Jill Brooke.
Robert Young became a pop culture icon for playing the all-American pop in Father Knows Best.
Look, son, let me give you a tip. Cling to your youth. Time has a habit of moving forward, never backward, never motionless. Stay with it as long as you can, okay?
As with most of his characters, Young exuded a calm optimism, whether it was on Father Knows Best or as the caring Marcus Welby, MD.
You want Tracy? All yours.
It was a quality that also surfaced in his films, such as Secret Agent. Young once said that there was a secret to his success. The audience liked him as a good guy.
Played a guy in a black hat one time, didn't work. The audience, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, didn't believe it.
And it was equally hard for the public to believe when he confessed his problems with depression and alcoholism. He told reporters sometimes he felt guilty playing the reliable, steady-as-a-rock patriarch, when in fact, he was in real life often so unhappy.
You're going over to Patty's house tonight.
His candor only endeared him more to the audiences. Later, learning he had a chemical imbalance, he continued battling with depression and spoke out about the insidious problem, which led to a suicide attempt in 1991.
You feel better when you're honest.
In later years, he also starred in the TV movie Mercy Killing. Roles for an actor in his 80s were rare, but fortunately he found contentment in what he called his best role, that of a family man. Young started his acting career in 1931, after a talent scout saw him in a play. Stardom came quickly, and he was cast in many memorable roles, including The Enchanted Cottage. In the years that followed, he played the romantic lead in dozens of films before making a permanent mark on television.
Most of the things that I've done, as far as the screen is concerned, or television, or stage, or anything for that matter, has always been fun. I've always enjoyed it. It's been something that I've derived a great deal of pleasure from.
As well as a lot of success.
surpassed the 100-degree mark for the 17th straight day. Astronaut Alan Shepard died yesterday. He was 74. NASA says America has lost a shining star with the death of the astronaut. In 1959, Shepard was named one of NASA's 7 Mercury astronauts. 2 years later, Shepard made history when he became the first American to fly into space. Our next guest knew Alan Shepard very well. Captain Gene Cernan flew on 3 separate space missions, and he was the second American to walk in space as pilot of the Gemini 9 and holds the distinction of being the last man to leave footprints on the surface of the moon. And Captain Cernan joins us live from Houston. We thank you very much for joining us. Greatly appreciate it. Mr. Shepard is
being here under the circumstances.
Yeah, Mr. Shepard is being saluted as a true American pioneer. I suspect you would echo that.
There's no question. Al paved the way for everything we did thereafter. His 15-minute flight, the first one, doesn't seem very long by today's standards, but it sure opened the doors for the rest of us.
Tell me how you would describe Alan Shepard.
Well, when I was, before I got in the space program, people like Al and John Glenn and others were my heroes. I felt honored to be in a room with them when I got selected for the program, and Al was pretty hard to get to know in those early days, but I broke the barrier, broke the code, you might say, when I got assigned to be his backup on Apollo 14. You know, he did fly again when he went to the moon on Apollo 14, and that's when I really got to know Al Shepard, the real Al Shepard, who's got a heart of gold, and till this very moment, we have become and remain very, very, very personal friends.
You know, it's interesting that you say that. As I was doing reading this afternoon about Mr. Shepard, a number of people suggested that he wasn't necessarily the easiest guy to get to know, though they suggested he was fun to be around, but more than anything, they suggested that once you did, he was a good guy, as you just said there, but that he was fair and very straightforward.
Al never asked any quarter and never gave any quarter. He expected us to put out 110% because that's the way he approached everything he did. And I think you can, when you think about the fact that he got grounded and almost a decade later, just fought his way back and got in a position to be one of the only of the original 7 to land on the moon. That shows commitment, and Al was. Inside, Al was a softie, to be honest with you, and he sort of dedicated the latter part of his life to the future of young people.
Yeah, it's interesting you suggest him fighting back. He had an inner ear ailment that sidelined him for a little while, and indeed he did, in fact, come back to command the Apollo 14 flight. I'm wondering, though, because you sit in a very unique seat having done it, much like today's athlete, astronauts during that time were truly America's heroes. Did someone like Alan Shepard, one, realize that, and did he appreciate all that he meant to people?
Well, I think he appreciated it, but Al was not one to seek celebrity status or hero status. I mean, he felt he was given an opportunity and a job to do, and he just wanted to get it done and wanted to do it. But unlike, you know, so-called celebrities today, he didn't ask for much in return. But I think he realized that, you know, once you walk on the moon, you are different, and he accepted that role.
How much of the American public does not necessarily understand the fortitude that it takes to do what you and others have done, particularly Mr. Shepard being such a pioneer, going out there first?
I've been labeled the last man to have walked on the moon. It's a dubious honor because it's been far too long. I wish someone would have taken that distinction away from me, but you got to realize we have a whole generation of young men and young women in the country today who have already graduated college, who were born after I made those final steps. So the name Al Shepard to them, or John Glenn to them, is something almost out of the distant past, and quite frankly, I don't believe much of that generation's realized what it took at that point in time, not just of the astronauts, but of an entire nation to get to the moon. We had no guarantees, as people want today. We did it because we thought it was the right thing to do, and we were willing to take the risk to get it done. And Al Shepard just typifies that commitment that was made a long time ago. And that's something I think we have to relate to the present-day generations.
President Clinton called Mr. Shepard one of the great astronauts, one of our greatest astronauts in suggested that the nation owed a debt of gratitude to him for his pioneering spirit with his space career. I'm wondering, when you hear those words, obviously very well deserved by Mr. Shepard, but do you also, and many have suggested this who have lived the life with NASA, that maybe it rings a little hollow because, as you suggest, they would like to see the space program move forward a little further?
Well, I think most people, the question I get asked today is, why did we quit? Why did we go on, and when are we going back? The space program is alive and well today. The space station is going to be underway very shortly. It's an international effort, but it takes us out of the exploration mode. Going to the moon, and I'm a true believer in that we should be ready and be on our way to Mars pretty quickly, is a little different type of space program, and people are beginning to get excited about that again, and want to reach out and want to get answers to questions they haven't even thought of at this point in time. And that's what the Apollo program was all about. Maybe we did it too soon. Maybe it came before its time, but nonetheless we did it. We did it a generation ago, and quite frankly, I think it's time to get on with it again.
All right. Well, Captain Cernan, thank you for joining us today and also sharing your remembrances of a great pioneer with an American spirit.
Well, thank you. Al Shepard was certainly a very special friend to me, and a great...
All right. Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate that. Now we're going to turn to NBC's Jay Barbary, who, in fact, many of you know, is our man when it comes to NASA. In fact, Jay has covered everything that's gone up in space, including some rocks they threw up before they sent those rockets up. But more importantly, he was a good friend to Alan Shepard for over 39 years and wrote a best-selling book titled Moonshot. And Jay joins us from Cape Canaveral, Florida. Jay, thank you very much for joining us, not only as a colleague, but this is somewhat, I'm sure, of a difficult day for you today to lose a close friend. But tell us, as you reminisce about this great man, what your thoughts are.
Well, you said it there, Ed. He was a great man. And you know, often when people pass along, it's easy for us to say that. But in Alan Shepard's case, it really fits. And we just had Gene Cernan on. Gene is cut from the same cloth. These two guys really were American heroes. They're the real American heroes. And they came to us at a time when it was not you know, out of style to love the flag. It wasn't out of style to worship heroes. It wasn't out of style to love your country. And Alan Shepard, who admired Charles Lindbergh, came forth and he made the sacrifices and the flights, and he did what it took to get America into space. He did it when people were trying to stop him. But each time that he flew, he had the space program on his back, and he took care of business. And all the astronauts admired him, even though he was called the cold commander at times. But he also had a humor that was fantastic. I had the opportunity to be a co-MC with him on several programs. And he was one of the funniest men that you'd also would ever meet, Ed. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about his humor, if I could. For example, during the countdown before he made his first flight, the director of the Mercury program was Walt Williams, who was a very serious person who never smiled. He had to leave the pad one day at lunch to go to town to speak before a civic group, and he didn't have a car. So he's walking around and he's asking everybody, how can I get to the Holiday Inn to make my speech? And Al Shepard walked up to him and says, Walt, take my Corvette. It's okay. Well, it was a hot rod Corvette, and it took Alan a couple of minutes to teach him how to drive it. So finally, Walt got it off the pad and was on his way. And Alan walked over to a phone and called security and said, this is astronaut Alan Shepard. Someone just stole my Corvette. Would you please stop him? Well, they stopped him at the gate, jerked him out, put the handcuffs on him, and had him handcuffed. When Charles Buckley, the director of NASA security, came up and says, let him go, he's the director of the program. Well, Walt wouldn't talk to Alan for like 3 or 4 weeks. But he was that kind of guy. And even though he had this aloofness about him to a certain extent, Alan was one of the warmest persons, as Gene Cernan said. You wouldn't find a person with a bigger heart. He was always helping people. He was a self-made millionaire. He lived in a very fine home out on Pebble Beach in California, but I've never seen that man turn down anybody in need. He was one of the finest human beings that God chose to put on this planet.
Well, listen, Jay, I always thank you when you join us with your reports, and especially today, Jay. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure, Ed.
Thanks very much. MSNBC on the internet has more about Alan Shepard. You can find out about his life by clicking on MSNBC's special coverage of NASA's Glory Days. There's a timeline of his life, and you can watch a video clip of Shepard hitting the first golf ball on the moon. Complete coverage is in the news section of MSNBC.com. If you're having a hard time keeping cool during this summer, you're not alone. Hot weather is everywhere. Imagine how hard it would be if you were covered.
It is night and pitch black outside. For 10 points, how long must the explorers wait until sunrise?
Sun doesn't rise on Mercury.
Brimar Stebbins.
They won't get a sunrise because Mercury has one side perpetually turned towards the sun and the other side awaiting the sun.
That's right. They would have to wait forever. That's the answer.
Yeah, Ma, I know I owe $2,000. Guess what?
Died. That story and the rest of the headlines from NBC News and John Snyder.
A major historical figure of the 20th century has passed away. Alan Shepard, one of the original Mercury astronauts and the first American in space, died yesterday in a California hospital at the age of 74. President Clinton says he will always be remembered for his bravery.
Alan Shepard understood the odds. He faced them bravely. And he led our country and all humanity beyond the bounds of our planet, across a truly new frontier, into the new era of space exploration.
Log on to MSNBC.com for a complete look back at Alan Shepard's life, including a video clip of his famous golf swing on the moon. Outgoing UN Ambassador Bill Richardson was on Capitol Hill today. The occasion was a confirmation hearing for his nomination.
And all humanity beyond the bounds of our planet, across a truly new frontier, into the new era of space exploration.
No one was more dedicated to this country and to the astronaut program, to flying, to the Navy, to being a dedicated patriot in this country. No one is going to exceed Al Shepard in that regard.
Jim Lovell, the commander of Apollo 13, wanted to be a Mercury astronaut and told the story of his meeting with Shepard early in the Mercury astronaut selection process.
I first met him when we were in the Mercury selection program together, and he gave me a ride over to the place where we were having our first interviews. And of course, I didn't make it, and Al did. But at that time, you know, he was really sort of a warm fellow. But he could be very aloof at times. We call him either the icy commander or Smiling Al at the Cape.
Shepard's friends and colleagues remember him first as a hero. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor, but also as a fierce competitor, something Shepard talked about in his final television interview with CNN 3 weeks ago.
I think being an astronaut, to me, and I think to most of the chaps, was a continual challenge. Of course, originally there was a challenge of the selection process, and then as chaps had been training for a couple of years, there'd be another selection process to move into this and that. It was always something, because there were a bunch of bright people.
Shepard was 74 years old when he succumbed to his final challenge, a losing battle with leukemia. John Holloman, CNN.
And the U.S. has lost yet another cultural icon, actor Robert Young.
But still high. 5.5 weeks ago.
The star of such television classics as Marcus Welby, M.D. and Father Knows Best died last night at his suburban Los Angeles home. Young won 3 Emmys during his TV career. His daughter says the world has lost one of the last real leading men. Closing arguments are set tomorrow in Texas in the...
Man who had the right stuff.
He was brave, ambitious, and cocky. The right stuff to be the first American in space. And Alan Shepard knew he might be killed as he squeezed into his Freedom 7 capsule for the Mercury mission. But the flight was perfect, and so was Shepard.
This is Freedom 7. The fuel is go.
It was over in 15 minutes, not even one orbit, but Shepard had been in space. President JFK and the nation applauded. John Glenn was the first American in orbit. He mourned Shepard today.
It's a big loss, and I've lost a friend, and the country's lost a great patriot.
They were among the original 7 astronauts. 3 have died, Shepard from leukemia. In 1971, he'd commanded Apollo 14, and Shepard was the 5th man to walk on the moon. He wept at Earth's beauty, then became the first man to try a 6-iron on the lunar links. President Clinton thanked Alan Shepard.
Those of us who are old enough to remember the first space flights will always remember what an impression he made on us and on the world.
With word of Shepard's death, the Smithsonian today rushed Freedom 7 to the Air and Space Museum. It's an unprecedented tribute to the first American in space. Shepard's Mercury capsule will remain on public display here in the Milestones of Flight Gallery until the astronaut is laid to rest.
Just pay that much of a tribute on the day that he died. I think it's really neat.
In later life, he'd make a fortune in business. He'd been to the moon, but Alan Shepard was most proud of 15 minutes in 1961 when he was the first American in space. I'm Steve Handelsman, News Channel 4, Washington.
In 1971, Shepard served by presidential appointment as a U.S. delegate to the United Nations General Assembly.
It was her dream to come to America and participate in the Goodwill Games. Today, 17-year-old gymnast.
Shepard is a man who could be counted on. NASA says America has lost a shining star, and President Clinton today expressed his gratitude to the man who will be forever known as the first American in space. Shepard was also one of only 12 U.S. astronauts to walk on the moon. He died yesterday at the age of 74. Hot, hot, perhaps even hotter. That's the weather report across much of the country. The mercury is expected to top 100 in Philadelphia. Dallas is in its 17th day of triple-digit temperatures. So far, the heat is blamed for at least 130 deaths in 7 states. A Senate panel grilled Bill Richardson today as they weigh his nomination for Energy Secretary. He had to answer some questions also about Monica Lewinsky. Richardson's interviewed her for a position at the UN last fall. She was offered the job but turned it down. Richardson, the outgoing UN ambassador, is expected to be approved for his new post. President Clinton's personal secretary, Betty Curry, spent a 5th day before Kenneth Starr's grand jury. Her lawyer said he believes this was her final appearance, and she's very glad it's over. The independent counsel is interested in Curry's contacts with Monica Lewinsky. Linda Tripp was also at the grand jury today, but...
This is CNN.
Heroin making a deadly comeback. Dozens of suspected dealers are indicted in a Texas suburb. He had the right stuff. The first American to fly in space has died. And at the Goodwill Games,
died in a Monterey, California hospital of leukemia. He was one of the 7 original Mercury astronauts, the first American to fly in space. That was on May 5th, 1961. 10 years later, Shepard commanded the Apollo 14 mission and became the 5th man to walk on the moon. He was 74 years old. We'll have more about him at the end of the program tonight. Between now and then, the new IRS law
died. The 74-year-old former Navy test pilot who went on to hit golf balls on the moon suffered from leukemia. CNN's John Zarella has more on the life of a man who collected more than his share of world's firsts.
By the time Alan Shepard's silver spacesuit shimmered in the floodlights, the United States was woefully behind. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin had already become the first human in space. The U.S. was losing the space race. It was up to Shepard. He carried the burden of restoring national pride. On May 5th, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space.
All right, lift off and the clock is started.
When you think back on his putting himself on that rocket for the first time, and a lot of people not knowing how man was going to react to that environment, you have to give a lot of credit to Alan Shepard.
Shepard's sub-orbital flight went perfectly. It lasted all of 15 minutes and 22 seconds.
What a beautiful view. Cloud cover over Florida.
Shepard made history. He made history again as one of only 12 human beings to set foot on the moon.
It looks like you're about on the bottom step and on the surface. Not bad for an old man.
Okay, you're right. Alma's on the surface, and it's been a long way, but we're here.
Shepard commanded Apollo 14. Coming on the heels of the near-disastrous Apollo 13 mission, this one held tremendous interest.
Nothing like being up to your armpits in lunar dust.
Shepard and Edgar Mitchell spent 9 hours working on the moon's surface and playing. Before the mission, Shepard had been unrelenting about something special he wanted to do.
I went to the boss and I said, "Boss, I want to hit a golf ball on the moon." He said, "Shepard, you've been giving me trouble for 15 years. The answer is hell no."
In the end, he hit not one, but 2 moon shots.
They got more dirt than ball this time. More dirt than ball. Here we go again. That looked like a slice to me, Al. There we go.
In 1974, Rear Admiral Alan Shepard retired from NASA and the Navy. He spent his remaining years running construction and consulting businesses, raising money for higher education, promoting space exploration through speeches and books. And he hit lots of golf shots, something he loved almost as much as flying. John Zarella, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
United States Senator John Glenn of Ohio was also among the first wave of pioneering American astronauts. Glenn recalled the time when Shepard made history with that 15-minute flight aboard Freedom 7.
I think we were aware of the type history that we were about to get involved with that morning, but it's not, those are times when you try and break the tension, and there are a lot of little jokes back and forth. I had a picture that I had installed on the periscope, or installed in the capsule to break the tension a little bit, which he got a big kick out of. I won't describe the picture, but Al got a big kick out of that, and I think he still had that picture.
Incidentally, John Glenn is scheduled to return to space this October at the age of 77 aboard a space shuttle. One of American television's most beloved dads also has died. Robert Young died Tuesday at his home in California. He had roles in more than 80 movies, but is perhaps best known for his role as Jim Anderson in the 1950s television series Father Knows Best. He also played the title character in the series Marcus Welby, M.D., in the 1970s. Robert Young was 91 years old. Still to come on Worldview, new advances in cloning using mice and what it could mean for...
That's right. I don't care how hard it is, because you know what? I'll be enjoying more heat even when I hit it, because I'll be in the Bahamas. All right? So it's going to be harder where I'm going after this.
The Powerball jackpot has been growing steadily since the record $195 million jackpot in May. But the manager of Zinn says the crowds didn't start showing up again until it got close to $100 million. But like when you're around 30, 40 million.
No, then it's just like normal day.
So nobody will come out here for 30 or 40 million?
No. For many people, I think it's just a pocket change.
Pocket change, eh? Well, they'll get to find out later on tonight if there's a winner here in the $125 million jackpot. The drawing at 10:59. We'll, of course, have those numbers tonight at 11. Reporting live from Greenwich, Connecticut, John Noel, News Channel 4.
All right, John, thanks. New grief tonight for a family who just buried a loved one. Coming up at 11, Tim Minton investigates a story you'll see only on News Channel 4. Plus, cleanup in Times Square. We'll have the latest on that deadly construction accident that shut down streets and crippled businesses, all coming up at 11.
And that's News Channel 4 at 6.
Stay tuned now for NBC Nightly News. Sue and I hope to see you at 11. Good night.
The Right Stuff, a true hero, astronaut Alan Shepard, the first American into space. Tonight, the nation mourns him. In depth tonight, where are they now? The other brave young Americans who went with Shepard into the unknown. Making copies. First, Dolly the sheep, now mice. Are we a big step closer to cloning humans? And blazing heat and drought. And now an old plague from nature, grasshoppers eating everything in sight.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Alan Shepard, the crew-cut son of a New England banker. He had a toothy grin and a daredevil soul. He was the first American into space and the only one to play golf on the moon. He was a Naval Academy graduate, a veteran of World War II, a fighter pilot, later a millionaire businessman.
And his death in California at the age of 74 is the passage of an American hero who set the bar very high. NBC's Robert Hager tonight begins our coverage.
The Soviet Union celebrated beating America to space with the unmanned satellite Sputnik, then sending cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into orbit in 1961. 23 days later, as astronaut Alan Shepard waited on the launch pad, America waited with him. NBC correspondent Jay Barbary remembers.
People here literally fell to their knees and prayed as this man took off. They stopped wherever they were.
Reading loud and clear.
It was just a 15-minute flight and only 5 minutes technically in space as he shot 300 miles out into the Atlantic. But as a helicopter plucked him from his ocean landing, along with his space capsule,